The Center for Educational Media and the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University are proud to offer professional development to K-12 educators in Tennessee through our online video library. The following video is aligned with TEAM, the Tennessee Educator Acceleration Model, which is the educator evaluation system used in Tennessee. For more professional development videos, check out our website at cem.mtsu.edu.
I wanted to take just a minute just to say again, thanks for being excellent participants. It makes it a whole lot easier on someone coming up as the presenter or the facilitator to have people who are willing to engage, because that takes a little bit of risk, and it also just takes general willingness to support each other. I feel like you guys are some of the best people to be around, because I know that if you choose to work with kids like ESL students that are often marginalized, that tells me a lot about your heart. So even though I don't know you, I can tell you that already I like you, and that's always a good thing. So I'll start this session with a brief story as we work into the can-dos, and really can-dos involve a lot of lesson plannings, and that's where we are. I really wish we had more classroom teachers here. I think this session would be very beneficial for them. Is anyone here a classroom teacher? 1, 2, okay, good. What grade do you teach? 8th grade. Oh, you are valuable to this session, because I do not teach 8th grade, and I need someone who does. Good. What grade do you teach?
9 to 12.
Another very valuable person to this session. I'm sorry so many of my examples come from the 1-2 area. I should have brought my Civil War lesson from 5th grade. But I'm so familiar with that I feel like that's a good launching point. And then I honestly prefer that when we get to more authentic planning, that it comes from the experts, and you trump me hands down when it comes to teaching 8th grade or 6th, because I haven't taught those those subjects or those grade levels. Quick story for you. Went to a wedding about a year ago. Really good friend of the family. I mean, we'd watched the kid grow up. He goes down, he's graduating from med school in Memphis. He marries, keep in mind, he is as redheaded as they come, lots of freckles and extremely pale. And he marries an Egyptian girl that he meets in med school. They fall madly in love and decide to live happily ever after. So it comes time for giving the toast at the wedding. And I mean, the lineup of bridesmaids and groomsmen is just phenomenal. Side note, I used to do weddings. I retired from that as of this year. I used to do big weddings up in Nashville. So I'm always up for a really good wedding and how everything goes. So it comes time for the toast. And so the girls get up there, and every time they introduce someone, they also introduce them by their medical degree. So talk about an intense and intimidating lineup of your wedding guest party. You're starting to not feel too intelligent really quick. And so they introduce them. They came up to give their toast, and so we have someone who is going into like neurology, eventually going to become a surgeon. We have someone else who has been like selected to tour the U.S. for her research on cancer of the blood. You know, all of these things that are major advanced degrees, right? She is going to trump my salary 10 times over, and then some. Lots of the wedding party. And that was where I had a definite aha moment. As they are giving their speeches, I bet in a 2-minute speech, I would say only 2 of their subjects and verbs agreed during that short period of time. And I was like, that is so interesting, because so many times as we are planning and we are doing these lesson plans and we are prioritizing what is super important for our kids to get, and it seems like too many times I hear teachers say, well, if they don't get this, they're not going to be able to do anything in life. And so many times I feel like it's the English language with that subject-verb agreement that is a major issue, where kids are like failing all the time because they can't get their subjects and verbs to agree. However, because of these now young adults getting all of that content, I'd say they're going to be okay in life. The funniest part was the ending of one of them where she was just super sweet, and she was like, I love you, Blake. You're a really good match for Nancy. You're going to be fantastic. And she leans up and says, but if you ever hurt her, there's a girl from Colombia who will track you down. That was the one time the subject and verb did agree. So the message was well conveyed. So I say that because it was such an aha moment that now whenever we look to plan lessons and we look to help teachers plan lessons, I think it is super important to prioritize what does this kid really need to advance to the next level of education, time after time. And so then we go back to our can-do descriptors. I think they are extremely helpful. The question is, where do we start on our planning? Just briefly, how many of you teach elementary? The majority, okay. Middle school? Okay, and then with high school, are you alone? I'm so sorry. The lone read over here. We'll have to recruit more for you. What do you feel to be the hardest subject to teach EL students? And again, this can vary. I think there's a lot of factors that come to this, but what do you think is the hardest subject to teach ELs? Just in your personal world.
History. Yeah, that was my answer.
History. Mm-hmm. History is very hard to make concrete. Mm-hmm. History. Mm-hmm.
U.S. history particularly.
U.S. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, good. Good. I thought that would probably come up. Mm-hmm. What else? Science. Mm-hmm. Do you ever find that it is determined largely by classroom teachers? Or do you think it's just science in general that's really hard? I mean, it's just hard, multiple grades, science in general. Mm-hmm. So we've got the history side.
Writing is very hard to teach.
Yes, yes. I think you're right. I think that is the case. So maybe which comes first, chicken or the egg situation, which comes first in teaching? Do you try more to teach writing, or do you try more to teach those content area subjects?
Content, because I understand this stuff myself, or I can learn it. Mm-hmm. Writing, I'm not there. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I can't teach something that I can't do myself.
Yeah. Which do you think would take them further? Do you think that content or the writing? Mm-hmm. On what they choose. Like, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just something to think about, just again, using this time just to kind of challenge yourself and argue with yourself and just think for a little bit. I can argue with myself back and forth on that quite a bit. So that takes us then to planning, right? Planning. So that's where even with the can-do descriptors, there's got to be some planning involved. So where do you start? And there's no right or wrong answer to that. So out of curiosity, some of you, when you go to plan, where do you start? Again, no right or wrong answer.
At the beginning of the year and throughout the year, I refer back to my WIDA charts to see where my kids were and where they need to go.
Okay.
And then I try to correlate that with grade level standards and skills that they need also for that grade level, to... So you start with WIDA. That's where you start, is with a can-do descriptor. Okay. Anybody else?
I look at what our school's doing on like their curriculum map, like
Curriculum
what they're
map,
doing in the
pacing guides.
classroom, and then correlate it to like what do I know my kids need or can do, so we can supplement that or even like give some of the background knowledge before they get to certain things.
Okay.
To help fill them in.
Is your pacing guide, is it content-based first, or do you have it for every subject?
They have it for every subject.
Okay, so it's not a completely integrated pacing guide yet, or not even yet, but it's not. Okay. What about you all?
And grade level content standards, and then match it with their English language proficiency level.
Okay, good. Over here, where do y'all start?
I use my Finish Line book.
Your what slide book?
Finish Line, which
Finish Line book. Okay.
Finish Line,
Okay.
which is aligned with the WIDA standards.
Okay. Okay. Good. I haven't either. Anybody else? High school and 8th grade teacher, where do you start?
My standards.
Okay. Content standards or or content
Both.
standards for the most part? Okay. Good. Same?
I think you have to look at both.
Okay.
I think they're more likely to reach the mastery levels that we want them to obtain through WIDA if you try and meld the two.
Okay. So basic general education practice is that you're going to begin with that end in mind. So you know that end, it's just going to be a matter now of getting there. And then we've got those grades that go along with it. So I think the two topics for today, they do intertwine quite a bit. When you start looking at those WIDA standards and you're planning a lesson, your can-do descriptors, and you're planning a lesson, do you feel like every student has to have the instruction at the score that was returned to you that year? Does that make sense? Like if you have a kid that comes back and their score is a 3.2, but then you have another kid in that pull-out group and their score is a 1.6. Thoughts there?
I think some students are just poor test takers, and the test doesn't truly reflect their abilities. And I think that's true of any student.
So would you say that with help, the student can receive instruction at a higher level of their WIDA score than perhaps how they were scored?
Yes.
Agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's my takeaway. I think that's really important. I've seen some teachers really stress out trying to give that kid, and there's just not enough staff to handle that. There's not enough hours in the day to handle it. So at some point it has to be compromised. And I feel like in that case, I would compromise to that higher level and then help that one that is a little bit lower, bring them along, because you're still typically in that small group. Do you feel like you have a pretty good grasp of the big ideas in social studies and science in all grade levels that you're servicing? No. Interesting.
I think it depends on, if you're in Nashville and you have just 5th grade ESL, or if you've got K-12 ESL, or even K-5, you're looking at a lot of different grades, a lot of different subjects.
Yes.
So I think that makes a difference.
6 through 8,
Yes.
They're vary greatly from one to the other, so.
They do, K through 5. That has been perhaps the biggest challenge in moving from being a classroom teacher where I taught 1st and 2nd, and so I could really zoom in on just those 2 grade levels, to where now as that pull-out teacher, even though I don't necessarily service 3rd grade, I still have to get a handle on those 3rd grade content standards. Otherwise, I can't find the gap. I can't find why they're still struggling. So I think that's something that is pretty critical. The other thing that's fairly critical is the understanding of the classroom teacher that if you don't teach this, they're not going to get it, right? You're not going to go back and get that again, at least through elementary. If you don't start hitting it by 1st grade, then you may touch on it again in 3rd, like Tennessee history. I'm a history English person. That was my emphasis, and so I go back to that a lot, if you notice that. So if they don't start getting some foundation as to the state of Tennessee or to government, then by the time they move to 3rd and they're going into the electoral college, they're really going to be confused. Does that make sense? There's a part of me, I would just love to go down like each hallway and put the big ideas for each grade level and have it like posted outside in the hall. It's like, you've got to teach this. If you don't, my ESLs are going to be really falling through the cracks. And so I'm kind of curious, do you feel like your district, if you're going to show me like on a scale of 1 to 10, how well your school, let's just go with school, how well your school that you are in emphasizes the content standards at their grade levels? And it's one of those things that I don't necessarily look for it as good or bad. I just see it as, hey, we can come back from this collaborative with more of a plan to help move that school from a one toward, hey, this is obviously really important. We're seeing that whenever you're asking me about our lower test scores for ESLs, they're looking for a school improvement plan. How you can say, hey, one thing that would help a lot would be to teach those content-based standards. That's what I'm kind of going for with this.
I think that's why pacing guides are so key, because I've been in schools where the pacing guide was a formality, and I've been in schools where pacing guides were their Bible. And there's a huge difference when those pacing guides are followed and each grade level embraces that guide.
Great. Yes, I think that's huge. As well as even vertical planning. When those schools don't really have a vertical planning team in place, and I don't mean just a team, but I mean a team where you've got somebody on that vertical planning that's actually going back to that grade level team and saying, hey guys, here's what's coming down the pike, here's the feedback third grade gave us as far as our kids who need a stronger skill in this when they're coming in, or even going back down from first grade saying, hey, this is what we would like for you to send your kids to. If you can just send them to us knowing this much, we can work from that. If that makes sense. Okay, so here's where everything turns truly authentic in this work session. It's because what came up is how to incorporate the can-dos into general lesson planning, right? Okay. Ashley, can you pull up that landmarks lesson plan? Okay, I'm thick-skinned. We can rake this across the coals if you want to. This is a lesson plan that I did with a small group of pull-out. Once again, first graders. Love first grade. So they generally have to learn Tennessee landmarks. That's where it starts. But that's not the only thing they have to learn. So we use TEAM in our district. I came from a district that used TAP, so it may look a little familiar, a little unfamiliar. Bottom line is, trying to integrate those social studies standards with some writing standards, basically. What do the kids have to move up to this lesson? Well, we started off with just general information about the state of Tennessee, what is a landmark versus what is a landform, so they're getting that vocabulary there, and then moving into the writing component. Took a very familiar story that they'd heard multiple versions of, which was if you give a mouse a cookie, right? First graders, that's a go-to. And then it moves on into if you take a mouse to the movies. So what we ended up with was if you take a mouse where? And so the we do was student choice. So they got to choose. And they chose, of course, to take the mouse to the soccer field because they love soccer. It's a good thing. And then their final assessment was if you take a mouse to Tennessee. So at that point, we had already talked about the tulip poplar, we talked about the purple iris and what they would see. We talked about all sorts of things like that. By the end, when we're working through that assessment, part of their assessment was even like a little FaceTime interview, so if they could read their story to someone else, so that would get some speaking in there. So my question with that is, okay, here's my lesson plan, here's where we're going. How do those can-dos fit into that? First grade levels, anywhere from 1s on up. So if you brought your WIDA can-do descriptors, pull out that page. It's that grade level cluster 1, 2. So now the questions I ask myself at this point whenever I'm planning is, have my students gained some content knowledge in social studies? Yes. Or are they able to through these lessons? Then next, can we move that over to writing? And do they even have a scaffold with their writing? They've got familiar text, they've got a familiar format, and so then now we've got what else can we look at our can-dos and think about what other skills can be brought in. So if you look at the writing, provide information using graphic organizers, they were able to do that based on their landmarks in Tennessee. That became a graphic organizer for them. List of words and phrases from banks or walls, we did that. Complete sentence starters, they could do that even whenever we broke it down, like talking about the tulip poplar, what it looked like based on pictures and research from there. And then they could describe the place that we were talking about. Okay, so that was level 2. As I look at it as well, could some of my students keep moving on up into level 3, level 4, level 5? Out of the students that were in that class, several of those could do that. So that's where I'm getting some of my can-do descriptors. That's in the writing. And then I turned over to speaking, and the same could be said for that. They relied upon the vocabulary and the terminology that was used in the other If You Give a Mouse series. And so that could also be put into this same lesson. Did it hit listening, speaking, reading, and writing? The lesson does, but I don't necessarily count that, if that makes sense. That's not necessarily a target of what I'm looking for to incorporate those can-do descriptors. So does that make sense? Okay, a little bit? Yeah. You're like, I don't teach first grade, I don't know. Yeah, okay. Okay, so that's where this is going to turn completely authentic, and that's where too, but if you have something you're familiar with, I'd love for you to use it, because I hate starting things from scratch, especially whenever you're on a limited time frame. So what I would like us to move to at this point is if you teach K1-2, if you would come to this kind of front table area, and then if you teach third, fourth, fifth even, we'll keep it to that, middle school front, and then perhaps the two of you could work together, and our high school and 8th grade teacher back here. If you're not necessarily in a specific grade, pick one you're familiar with, pick one where you've maybe got a lesson plan. Within your groups, choose somebody's lesson plan and then look to the can-do descriptors. If you've already put them in there, that's great. If you haven't, talk together and just see, how can we make this work? Okay? And then we are going to ask one person to share, kind of go through your lesson plan just briefly and where you put those can-do descriptors in. Everybody good? Give me a thumbs up if you're good. Everybody good? Yeah. Okay, and break.
Right now I'm doing a small unit. I'll call it a unit. We're working on, our classes are broken down in a weird way, but basically this particular group, I'm reading poems with them. They're a multi-grade group, but I am really trying to work on basically just some reasoning skills. So, they're inferring what they're doing, right? And in the poems, they're all about famous Hispanics that are from other countries originally, but those countries were all actually within the continental U.S. So, like Spanish Florida, Spanish Texas, or Spanish California before, but they all belonged to, it was either Mexico or Cuba or various other places. So this particular group, I'm just doing a small unit, and we're just reading through these poems. We're talking a little bit about the style of poems, what a poem looks like, and the fact that it doesn't have to rhyme.
So like a writing standard there, write narratives with detailed action, thoughts and feelings, and using time-worn words. Where does
here's the lesson. So we can get to the back pages because there's 4 pages.
Speaking and writing, all the 4
most of the time, and that's hard.
And read the text to them, or read it to them.
And I'm kind of, I teach the majority, which tend to fall into the kind of in here area, because I don't have, we divide my school multi-group, and so somebody else has this group, and I have this group, and then somebody else has that group. So it makes it a little bit easier to
in recounting some of the events of the story, right? We're just talking, right? And they write a sentence at the end, right? To verify for summary, basically, right? If you have emerging, which is the kids that are getting this, right? So they're we're talking about the sequence of events in the story, and there's 3 things that happen, 3 big things that happen, right? Identifying settings where this stuff's taking place.
But if they're actually
and that's something we probably just need to the next principal.
Okay, so that exercise, I got good feedback from some of you because I do not think the time would have been well spent only going over like the K1 and 2. I feel like we have enough people here in different grade levels to where it was much more beneficial for you to be looking through your own can-do statements for the grade levels that you are specifically in, especially like your high school and middle school. The other thing that was super beneficial to it, in my opinion, was our group back there working on that high school level. Again, hats off to you. So here's what's going to make all of your lives seem a whole lot easier is we're going to start with her. So if we could get our microphone over here to the lady in the black on the end. Okay, so tell us just a little bit, just a brief synopsis of that breakdown, and then kind of what we talked about as far as the couple of can-dos that would fit in your lesson plan. And even a little bit on that assessment, because we were talking about kind of how we would assess them at the end.
We discussed U.S. History Social Studies standard. It is U.S. 10. Let me pull it up here. My computer will, it's frozen. Anyway, they have to explain the similarities and differences between social Darwinism and social gospel. And we discussed actually having them explaining the similarities and differences between the two, and then having them create two separate lists with examples of each, and then cutting them up and pairing them off into the appropriate category.
But what was your challenge from the very beginning? Kids who came in who might not even know.
No concept of what social Darwinism is or social gospel.
Or even compare and contrast was to me the most significant.
Compare, contrast, all of that, and especially no hope of, forget putting it within the historical context. You have to make it relatable to an example that's relevant to them in their world now.
And so you determined a sort. We talked about even the repetition of the sort.
Yes.
Going from colored paper as
non-colored paper, doing it over the course of several days, not just in the synopsis of one lesson. And then we also talked about putting them under time constraints to get them more fluid with being able to produce the results and show that mastery.
Mm-hmm. And that might even lend itself then to the grade for that EL student.
Correct.
Whereas her gen ed student would be doing a lengthy writing
assessment. Yes, totally separate from that. But it's getting them to be able to identify what is social gospel, what are the examples of that, what is social Darwinism, and examples.
So now raise your hand if you'd like to go teach high school English or social studies. That is so hard, and that's the reality. That's why I think you saw even Joanne attracted to that group, is because that is what is really hard, as you know, if you work with K through 12, getting that broken down, and again, accessible education for that EL student. But that's a great job. Great job. We need more of you out there. Okay, let's go. We'll go right beside her. Next group. They're pointing to you.
So we're kind of like the oddball group. Mandy is our district-wide ESL teacher, so she is K-12. And I'm more of the, I guess, I won't say monitor, that's a really bad term to use, but I'm the director. That sounds even worse. Well, yeah, we'll go with that, director. So we were just looking at one that we had pulled from. So when we do trainings for our gen ed teachers, we show them the lesson plans that are on the WIDA website. So we pulled a couple of those that we had shared, and the one we were looking at, of course, like she was saying, with upper grades, it's a lot harder to help those, and we've had a huge population of newcomers, specifically in 7th grade at one very specific school. So we pulled one of those, and it was trying to make those connections for those newcomers of something they can really relate to. This one that we looked at was talking about a 20-minute poster where they had to work on their listening, speaking, reading, and writing skills, and the concept is around having them think about a mistake that they had made and making that personal connection to it, where they actually discuss those through Think, Pair, Share, and then take that on to sharing in group discussion, whole group, small group, onto actually putting a poster together, so having a visual representation for those different learning styles.
Then you could even bring more of that content in, like, you know, a mistake in your categorization of solids, liquids, gases, you know, just anything like that to get that additional content in would be, that's a good strategy for that too. Good. Okay. Somebody, we're just going to keep passing that mic group to group. Go. Okay, I know we have this group. This is our middle school bunch. Yes, uh-huh.
We are from the same county, so we sat together and just brainstormed a little bit about how we can get our teachers trained in this rubric. So ours was not specifically based on a lesson plan, but we just discussed some things that we could do with our colleagues. So.
And I don't
Sorry
think
to
that's,
disappoint.
no, it's okay. I don't think that's necessarily a waste of time because as we were talking about earlier, and you all agreed with that, you know, sometimes whenever that to-do list gets extremely lengthy and you've got this to do, this to do, this to do, this to do, they brought a good point. They're like, we need to study. We need to study our grade levels, can-do descriptors. It's something that just keeps getting put on the back burner. And sometimes even if you're taking this little 30-minute slot of time, it's better. I think you still know more now than what you walked in knowing today.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a good thing.
Just an organized plan for our group, you know, in our county. So I'm happy about that. So thank you.
That's great. Okay, you want to pass over to this group?
We had an easy time because we did first grade and we took your lesson plan and specifically matched our can-do descriptors. This is something we do, and I'm in Manchester City as well, with the TAP program, and this lesson plan is what we're familiar with. We took our can-do descriptors and took writing. We found 3 pre-writing strategies, 4 writing-related sentences, and 5 producing content-related sentences. Those were the writing pieces that we took from the can-do descriptors. For reading, we took from 2 identify and interpret pre-taught label diagrams and 3 match phrases and sentences to pictures. And of course, that would go along with the Tennessee map and the students working with that. We also pulled listening and speaking, and as Rebecca was saying, we don't always pull out and use each one of those domains, but we went ahead and matched them just in case. It depends on what children you have and what those needs are according to the data. Listening, we pulled 3 sequence pictures of stories from the read aloud, and that's taking the beginning, middle, and end, putting those in order. 4, locate objects, figures, places based on visuals and detailed oral descriptions. There again, going back to the map and listening as they're directed to the map and the places on the map. Speaking, we took 2 domains from that, 2 repeat facts or statements, and 4 sequencing stories with transition words. And if you give a mouse a cookie, it's key for transition words. So that was a really good piece, and having our ELs repeat that over and over, I find very valuable from that series of books especially. But that was what we did with the can-dos.
Then pass it behind you, because I know that you've presented on this topic before, and you had a good couple of good things to share with us.
Okay, so I'm with Rutherford County, and we do in-house trainings on this. Traveling around to the schools and training entire faculties on using the can-do descriptor charts. And basically, we tell them to take their basic lesson plan for any subject in their grade level, then take the list of students using the access scores, and that's where your students are. You have your chart, basically, that you fill in. You look at the can-do descriptor chart, which tells what they can do at each level of language proficiency. And you design an activity that they can do that will match what the rest of the class is doing, but it's at their level. And you can do that with assessments as well.
Mm-hmm. And you said even the next level up? Is that what you were encouraging?
You don't want to leave them where they are. If they scored a 1.0, you're not going to teach them. That's their independent level.
That's where they
are. You want to focus on a 2, 3. You can even go higher depending on the activity and the scaffolds that you use. So you always want to include what supports and scaffolds that you'll be including.
Mm-hmm. I think that's critical too.
It's been very well received. So if you need pointers on how to talk with your faculty members, just give me a holler.
It would be great. It would be really good. And that's about it to our students. We're good. Great. So wrapping up, I think we found our better presenter on this for sure, because you have experience on it. The second session I feel like went really fast, but hopefully, again, you looked at the ones that were good for your grade level and just became a little bit more familiar with it. The other thing that I think is still super important is making those connections and what you can learn from our peers, because you guys are a wealth of knowledge. You're learning more and more all the time, and I love coming together so that then I can hear more of your thoughts and also continue to grow as an educator. So I just want to say again, thanks for a lot of eye contact, thanks for a lot of comments, and just thanks for being an eager learner today. Thanks. Okay. Man, you're welcome.